Look, there's a lot of work to be done. We know that. I'm glad to see these steps being taken by House leadership, Senate leadership. We're going to have to reach consensus. And yes, the one big beautiful bill would be the preference of the House. I think here's the why. There's a lot of us that are just questioning whether there's going to be a true second bite at the apple. And that means capturing both the essence of what DOGE is trying to do, which is to streamline and drive efficiencies into government, which it desperately needs, as well as making sure that we capitalize on this opportunity to make sure that there isn't a 22% increase in taxes for the average American family. I mean, despite all the Democrats caterwauling about billionaires and millionaires and how this is going to be helping them, the simple fact is that with this expires, you're going to see 22% increase in taxes for those families. You're going to see small businesses hurt dramatically. NFIB says this is going to be a dramatic impact on their members. So we've got to go and get this done.
Well, one of the differences between the House and Senate's propositions on this, Congressman, is that the House bill includes a raising of the debt ceiling. Considering we just got an estimate from the Bipartisan Policy Center out with a guess on the X date when we would theoretically default on our debt between mid-July and October, knowing the deadline to extend the 2017 tax cuts isn't really until year end. Do you foresee that the debt ceiling fight is going to have to be separated, maybe so that you can grab some Democratic votes along the way?
That's a good question. I mean, that's a matter of strategy, frankly, as we're moving through this. It's going to need to happen. And this is what I always say to folks who say, oh, well, we don't need a debt ceiling, or yes, we cannot give this up. You have to look at what the purpose of the debt ceiling vote was. And it was to bring attention to a serious issue, a growing issue, and then it was to curb behavior. Well, I'm not sure people have really been paying attention as we've driven this up to $36 trillion in debt. And you have to ask yourself whether this is really curbed behavior. So what I'm pushing for is let's make sure that we have something in place that is a catalyst for the conversation. Clearly, purely a debt ceiling election or a debt ceiling vote hasn't been doing the job, in my opinion. So what is it that we're going to put in place? So, but I think we need to have something to drive that conversation. So it's going to be one of those points of debate and certainly a negotiation. But we know that the president wants this off his plate as well. And so I think he'll have a compelling argument when it comes to the Senate leadership.
I'm sure you've been watching and listening to a difficult conversation on the other side of the aisle from your perch, Congressman, with a lot of angry Democrats following the debate over the CR and Chuck Schumer's eventual decision to back it. He was sticking up for himself on Sunday morning, still fending off calls for him to step down. I don't know if this is going to be a purely Republican exercise. It is reconciliation. You have every right for it to be. I just wonder if Democrats should be or will be involved in the ground floor talks that are getting started now.
Well, those are two things. Should be and will be are very, very different around here. We should have had every Democrat that's ever complained about a potential government shutdown on that CR, but they didn't. And it begs the question, which is why. And I think the obvious answer to that is politics. And look, if the Democrats want to trot Bernie Sanders and AOC out and do a nationwide, arena tour, knock yourself out. Yes, you are getting some big crowds, but I do not believe that is where most of America is. And that is going to be problematic, I think, for them on their side of this equation. But nonetheless, we're going to need to work through this on the reconciliation side, and we might see a few of those more clear-eyed, clear-minded Democrat colleagues come across and say, look, this really is our best opportunity. And if we're going to see 40 million families have their per-child tax credit cut in half, that's an impact. That's not a Republican issue. That's not a Democrat issue. That's not a red state, blue state issue. That's a family issue that is going to impact the checkbook of many, many families sitting around the kitchen table trying to figure out how do they afford gas and groceries and school supplies and all the other stuff, much less take a vacation or anything else. So That I think is going to be the essence of this.
Well, something else that could affect the checkbook of American families, Congressman, is if the cost of goods is effectively risen, at least for some of them, due to tariffs that are either in place now or the president has threatened to put in place further. We just heard from him in a cabinet meeting saying he'll be announcing car tariffs shortly, pharma at some point. But we've also had our own reporting internally here at Bloomberg that on April 2nd, he's actually looking at something a bit more pared back than the sweeping tariffs he's been talking about. What is your hope here on the actual outcome? What level of tariffs and on what goods is actually appropriate to achieve his objectives without hurting that checkbook you were just speaking about?
Yeah. Well, Kaylee, I always bring up to people who might be sitting in these chairs behind me here in my office wanting to discuss all this. You have to look at what is policy and what's tactic, right? And I think we've seen more tactic than actual policy numbers, hard numbers out of the president so far, and good for him. Here's his goal and objective: drive as much business back into the United States as physically possible to make sure that we've got good paying jobs here in the United States, that we are taking care of our citizens first and foremost, and that we've got a robust economy. And the fundamentals of the economy are sound, especially when we're talking about making sure that energy policy is rational, not what we've had for the last 4 years. Making sure that we are putting those Tax Cuts and Jobs Act provisions back in place. Making sure that we have a efficiency and a paring down of federal government and government, frankly, at all levels that has hindered growth. So yes, tariffs is going to be a part of that. I know that the Swiss and others that are dealing with pharmaceuticals have wanted to make sure that they are working with the administration. You happen to bring those up. Michigan, we've got a tremendous number of automotive suppliers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 automotive suppliers. A lot of them are looking at how they bring this back to the United States, if at all possible. It's interesting that the United Auto Workers are in support of the tariffs. The Canadian auto workers are not. That is, the union that's usually together is actually split on this one. So there's going to be some bumps in this road. There's no doubt. But I think we have to look at what that end game is, and that's to make America stronger, more prosperous, and stronger on the world stage. And I think President Trump is absolutely doing that.
Well, when we consider the concept of reshoring, whether it's the auto industry you mentioned or high tech, whether it's chips or pursuing AI, you need energy for all of that, Congressman. And I want to ask you about this nuclear plant in your backyard that's being relit with help from a grant from this White House, the Palisades nuclear generating station. If this thing is repaired and gets back online, is that for the better of your grid in your district, or are you going to be announcing a deal with a hyperscaler at some point that's going to park a data center next to that plant?
Well, the way we have energy that's crossing around in the Midwest is the MISO, and we need to have a grid that is robust. Palisades was actually taken offline and decommissioned. This is the first recommissioning of one of those plants. 3 Mile Island is being discussed about, another one out in Iowa. And this is a $56 million loan guarantee that's part of a larger package that I was glad to see went from the Biden administration. And I want to say thanks to Secretary Wright and President Trump for pushing this through as well, making sure that it's happening. Because at the end of the day, if it is about energy independence and making sure that we've got the ability to power our economic recovery, that's not just traditional oil and gas. This is making sure that we have nuclear available and developing those small modular reactors, SMRs, and you might see those surrounding this because you've got the grid in place, so you don't have all the delay and permitting and a lot of those things. So. This is good not just for Southwest Michigan or Michigan. This is good for the country, and we've got to figure out if this is a very viable way of repowering ourselves. And I'm glad to see it happening in Southwest Michigan.
Well, that's a domestic nuclear power plant, Congressman. I'd also like to ask you, given your seat on the Foreign Affairs Committee, about nuclear power plant or potentially plants plural abroad. in Ukraine or areas of Ukraine currently occupied by Russia. President Trump, during the cabinet meeting, talked about talking with Ukraine about nuclear power plant ownership. We know Zaporizhia has come up in conversations with President Zelensky. We also heard from Secretary of State Marco Rubio during this cabinet meeting that there is no military solution to the Russia-Ukraine war. As you hear the words coming from the administration, track the efforts toward peace that are underway and what you're hearing on the committee, where do you think this goes from here? What does the U.S. end up with and Ukraine and Russia end up with?
Well, that's part of the negotiations, and certainly this the mineral agreement was a big step of that. I know the president played some hardball on that, and he should have. I'm glad he did. I thought it was out of bounds what President Zelensky had done, and now that will drive hopefully an understanding and an agreement between our two countries. Exact same thing could be happening with the nuclear power plants, and of course those are more unique in that they're not just inert, right? You know, I mean, they have to be actively taken care of. They have to be tended to. They have to be utilized. And if you don't, or you bomb them or do something terrible like that, there's real consequences to that. So it's beneficial, I think, for Ukraine to have involvement of the United States, whether it's U.S. government or U.S. companies that are involved and engaged in that. And I think we can get there. I really do. And I think Secretary Rubio is right. After we've seen billions of dollars getting poured in to Ukraine and that conflict, they're at kind of a stalemate. Now, the Ukrainians have to figure out what exactly is that going to mean. But let's all remember, 20% of the country of Georgia next to Crimea is under Russian occupation. Crimea came under occupation during the Obama administration. Joe Biden called it a small incursion, a minor incursion, when Russia initially came in a couple of years ago. At this point, we've got to come up with a solution. It's costing millions of lives. I want to make sure that there's no U.S. lives, but I don't want to see any lives getting lost over this. So I'm glad to see him, President Trump and President Zelensky and Putin having the conversations that they need. And I'm thankful to, frankly, the Saudis for hosting a lot of that conversation, whether it's both in Gaza and Israel, but as well as this Russia and Ukraine problem.